out of it. So it was a really hard decision for me to make, but I finally hit the point where, I feel like I can't expand if I don't do this. I feel like I am going to plateau. I'm going to get stuck if I don't do this. So I just bit the bullet and did it.
Okay, so along those lines, because I think this is kind of part of that whole question. Okay, so no shoot job anymore. Wrestling is the shoot job. We've got the Mae Young Classic, which I assume is going to mean a whole lot of female wrestlers getting snatched up, which I would assume would mean, even more open spots for somebody like a Samantha Heights. But along with that, elevation up the card for somebody like a Samantha Heights. If a bunch of people at Shimmer get snatched up, or a bunch of people at, wherever we're talking about, WSU, we can go across the board. Do you think this is going to, help the women that don't get signed in a big way as far as the indies go and getting bookings, especially higher up the card on the promotions they already work?
I do. I absolutely think that it's going to open up more spots for people, but I also think the people that fill those spots are going to get compared to the predecessors to a certain point. There's always going to be so-and-so got signed, so she took her spot. She's not as good, da-da-da-da-da, so on and so forth. And then I also think that there are going to be people who are like, oh, well, she's just trying to be this person. They just got signed, so she thinks that she can just take over where she left off. So I think it's going to absolutely help, open up spots. But I also really think that there might be some shit talking that comes along with it, just because of, it is the nature of the beast. Wrestling fans are going to talk about you one way or another. They're either going to love you or they're going to hate you. And I feel like in this case, there's going to be a lot of negative, well, she's not as good as her. She's only in this place because she got signed. You know what I mean? So it'll help open those spots up, but I think there will be negatives that come with it.
Now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I know you've worked Shimmer before, obviously, you can look up and down your matches for that, but is this the first time you've gotten to work like a full weekend of Shimmer, 4 full matches 2 weeks ago?
It is. The first time I worked for Shimmer, it was just one tag match the first weekend. Then I worked 2 matches in one day on the Sunday in November. They ran Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They put me on both of the Sunday shows, but nothing before that. Then we worked WrestleMania weekend. I was in a 4-way there. And then this weekend, I finally was able to work all 4 shows for the first time, which was a great feeling. It really was, having that opportunity to work that many times in that short of a time span was really refreshing. It's something that doesn't happen very often.
You got to tell me about working with cheerleader Melissa, because I think at this point, cheerleader Melissa is like to independent wrestling for women, especially, like Reckless Youth was, like Christopher Daniels was, like Chris Hero was, at least for women. And I think on some level she could probably even be up there with the men as far as being that important to independent wrestling. What was it like to work with her? I'm sure you worked with her before, but I don't know if you'd ever worked with her in singles.
Well, so I had met her before on other shows, but I'd never worked her before. This is actually our first in-ring interaction whatsoever. So again, that's one of those matchings that you hear about it and you're just like, oh shit, what? I can't believe this is happening. It's very intimidating because you're right. She has been everywhere. She's done a lot for women's wrestling. So one of the first things that popped into my mind was, how did I get this opportunity? And then I immediately said, well, you probably did something right, so just work with it. So she was very intimidating, and she's very, what's the word I'm looking for here? I don't want to say rough in the ring, but she's very much in control, if that makes sense. Like, there was one point in that match where I had her in a knuckle lock. So I had her right hand in my left hand, and I went to run up the ropes and then jump off to give her a Rana, and she just yanked me down into a power bomb. And it was fully her controlling me that entire time, which is something that, a lot of girls can't do. A lot of girls can't control their own bodies, let alone someone else's. So, and I don't want to say a lot of girls because, the upper echelon, they absolutely can. But, I don't work the upper echelon 100% of the time. So it was very surprising to me just how, how strong she was and how easily she was able to control me. But that was definitely a surprising match. Definitely surprising.
So I got to talk about the elephant in the room because I almost feel bad bringing it up, but this was kind of the point I was trying to get to as far as a lot of the women moving on up is going to open opportunities for you, and I mean this in the nicest way possible. It seems like in most promotions, a lot of the women's promotions, that you've been kind of like the undercard, mid card. And what I'm hoping, opens up for you is that you end up being, the main eventer for a lot of these places. I know it's got to be earned, and I get that because you don't want that spot handed to you, and then fans and wrestlers alike will turn on you. But do you feel like, is it youth? Is it inexperience? And again, I'm not criticizing bookers because I think a lot of the people that were above you probably are above you for good reason. But what do you think it is that's kind of held you back to this point? And I don't mean held you back because like you're getting out, obviously, but held you from maybe that top spot in these promotions.
Well, I think it might be a few things. Definitely the youth and inexperience, because in the grand scheme of things, 4.5 years isn't that long. I've been a lot of places. I've worked a lot of really great girls, but I'm still considered very green by a lot of people. So I definitely think that the youth and inexperience is part of it. I also think part of it is image. You have to have something that's marketable for a main event spot. And, I'm very much the girl next door type. I'm very much the, I don't want to say small and innocent because I'm not innocent, but that's kind of the feel that a lot of people get just looking at me. A lot of people think that I'm in my early 20s or I've even gotten as low as 18, 19 years old. And I'm like, that's way off. So I think that image also has something to do with it. I don't think a lot of people feel like they can really put someone in that spot if, you look like a little girl. I've been, trying to work with well lately. I'm sorry, what was that?
I was going to say, is it like, okay, so you're not big enough to be a Jessica Havoc. You're not, that size. And then you're not like, okay, I think you're very pretty. I always said this about Tracy Mary also, that she was very pretty also, but she didn't necessarily use that. And you don't really necessarily use that either. Is it because you're neither here nor there as far as those two things go? You're not like, okay, and Priscilla Kelly really uses her sexuality. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then there's other girls that have their size on their side. And you're right, you are kind of like the girl next door. But see, I think that can endear you to a lot of people. But then you kind of, and I'm not saying you get saddled with it, but a lot of times you end up working heel in places. And I always thought that you seem more sympathetic to me.
Mm-hmm. And I get that a lot. There are people who have literally said, wait a minute, you, a bad guy? Really? I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of dastardly sometimes. Sometimes it works out for me, but sometimes because I look like a little girl, it just doesn't quite get where I want it to be, where I need it to be. So that's absolutely it. And, Crazy Mary is a great example. A lot of people always said that her and I look alike, or that I remind them of her. And she's one that she was very fit, especially, right before she got signed. She was very fit, in very good shape, and very pretty, but she didn't flaunt her good looks. And I think that's part of my drawback, is that I don't, just put it out there for everybody to see. There are some people that are very comfortable in that position and that can do it. And there are some people that absolutely can't. And then there are some people that are stuck in the middle like me, who have it and, can use it when needed. But, I just haven't really quite been able to bring that to the forefront with wrestling yet. That's something that, I'm trying to work on myself right now, is the next evolution of who I am, get gear that's, not flaunting it, not just presenting it to the world, but that accentuates it to an extent, so that I can use that part of myself to get further and to, to be taken more as a serious competitor instead of just, a little girl. That's what I seem
Yeah.
to get stuck with.
Talk a little bit about Shimmer Weekend. This past Shimmer Weekend, obviously it looks like they're starting to put a lot of faith in you. I mean, you're getting to work the whole weekend now that you're available to do that. That's awesome. Did you get any feedback from, any of the talents or like praise act? Did anybody talk to you afterwards and say, you looked really good this weekend. We want to see you back for a full weekend and up and on with you?
Well, with Shimmer, there are typically, because there are so many people, so many matches, and so much going on, there are typically agents that you speak with after your match who are kind of, in charge of giving you feedback and the critiques. And a lot of the weekend, I would speak with other veterans because I don't know how, but somehow my veterans, my agents were, doing something else or taking care of something else during my matches. But a lot of the critiques and the feedback that I get are pretty similar in that it's usually, just make yourself a bigger person in the ring, make sure that you're keeping your personality, that you're not dying, in the match, that you're keeping the crowd engaged, and that, that you're making the match, as big as you need to, That's the majority of the critiques I get. There's never a lot in the way of, do this move better, you should do this instead of that move, anything like that. With me, a lot of the feedback and critiques that I get are character-based, are, making myself larger than life and having that charisma in the ring. Because there are sometimes I get so focused on a match that I kind of lose it a little bit. And that's one of the biggest things is just, don't lose it. Find a way to keep yourself and your presence there no matter what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I know what you mean. When I think of Shimmer, I think of women's wrestling fans. And to me, and maybe, I joke a lot about women's wrestling fans, but, at the end of the day, though, even though I kind of make jokes about, because women's wrestling fans are a different breed to me. They're different than regular independent wrestling fans because I actually think that they're more respectful of the product, especially women's wrestling. And, I value that, even though I have people that I know only like women's wrestling or like it more than most people, and I make jokes about that. But at the end of the day, talk a little bit about them. Like, okay, let's say you go onto a card where there's, a mix of matches versus a card of all women's matches. Do you feel like that you get a little bit more respect on a women's card because of the type of audience you're working in front of?
I would definitely say so, especially with, Shimmer in particular, and then they had a really good crowd too. They were there because it is some of the best women's wrestling. It's not just a bunch of girls showing their TNA. It's not just a bunch of girls out there being pretty. It's a bunch of girls who have the looks and the talent. So, they're there for the wrestling and not to see a wardrobe malfunction. You know what I mean? Now, don't get me wrong, there are still fans that no matter where you go, they're going to be jerks. There are still fans that are going to heckle you, in one way or another. But the majority of the crowd is just there for the wrestling, not to make fun of you because you're a woman. I've been on a lot of shows where it's a crowd strictly for the men's wrestling, and then as soon as the women's match gets on, all they do is yell at you, no matter who you are, no matter if you're, heel or face, good guy, bad guy, it doesn't matter. They just yell things at you and insinuate that, that you're cheap and easy, no matter how good your work rate is. So that, that's definitely something that I enjoy about being at the women's shows is that it's not people there who are just going to call me those names. It's people that are going to watch the wrestling and appreciate it for what it is, one way or another.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The thing I was going to ask you that I can't sit here and say that, 6 or 7 years ago, I would watch a regular wrestling show and then not be bummed out when the women's match came on because it was a different world back then. I mean, it was probably when we started training, it wasn't even, up to par that it is now because, most women in wrestling, they were watching the Trish and Lita's, nothing against Trish and Lita, but it was a different era. The era now has definitely improved women's wrestling. But what I'm wondering about is when you work on those non-all-women shows, like in AAW, you've got all these people busting their ass. I mean, the guys are busting their ass. Do you feel like you have to work that much harder to get respect? From an audience that just saw, Desmond Xavier go flying over the top rope.